This is a great question, and I didn't get to it last video because I'm long-winded. But conservative estimates from most military experts say that China would need about 2 million troops to land on Taiwan and take Taiwan. You have to understand that China's entire military is only about 2.5 million people. So with regard to amphibious capability, transporting 2 million people is no easy matter. In fact, it's impossible for China. It's impossible right now because China only has the capability internally to its navy to carry 25,000 troops. Now, China has laws in place that show that they could say that they can commandeer commercial vehicles, and the estimates are somewhere between 650 to 750,000 troops could be transported via this commercial system on top of the 25,000. So at most, we're looking at 800,000 troops being able to transport across Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait into Taiwan. That's by most estimates not enough, considering the Taiwanese military has nearly 2 million people in both active and reserves with regard to preparing for a defense. And here's why I'm going to say it's impossible, because first and foremost, the buildup would be detected. The Western world would detect this buildup easily. We would watch as 650,000 troops start showing up near the ports across from Taiwan, as suddenly thousands of new boats try to squeeze their way into the ports to load these troops. It would take months. It would take many months. I'm talking 6 months at least. And the whole world would watch. The U.S. intelligence apparatus, the Taiwanese intelligence apparatus would watch. And if it started becoming a tipping point where the calculus showed that they likely would conduct an invasion, Taiwan would start executing internal sabotage operations on some of these ships. It would start executing a call up of all of its forces to bolster its defenses. It would probably start mining the Taiwan Strait. It would start building up its coastal artillery. It would start preparing the beaches for a defense. And there's only 14 beaches that China could land on. So it would prepare everything for a defense. China has been a threat to Taiwan for 70 years. So they've been preparing for 70 years. Meanwhile, to put that in context, Ukraine had only 8 years from the time of Crimea to now. They had 8 years to prepare for an invasion from Russia. And you can see how much problems Ukraine is giving Russia. On top of that, China has to cross 100 miles of ocean, not just drive across a man-made demarcated border like Russia did. That amphibious landing is impossible, because let me paint the picture of the hell on earth these people would face, these Chinese soldiers. Assuming nothing happens before the launch, and make no mistake, if the minute the go order happened, Taiwan would immediately start smoking the ports with ballistic missiles. It would immediately start using anti-ship missiles. It would use its navy to start sinking ships, whether they're civilian or military, because they just don't know. They'll say it's carrying troops, so it will just be an absolute nightmare. China would likely lose half of its amphibious force. That's 1 million troops. Now let's assume that they can launch simultaneously, which China can't, but let's say they can launch 2 million worth of troops simultaneously across the ocean because they've somehow gotten the capability. One, I don't know how they loaded up that many people onto ships, given their port structure can't support it, but let's say they figure out a way to do it, and they're moving across the ocean. These ships would face the Taiwan Navy, Taiwan Air Force, Taiwan anti-ship missiles, Taiwan ballistic missiles, Taiwan coastal defense artillery. It would be a massacre. And people will say things like, well, Taiwan would be softened up by Chinese missiles. No, you have to understand, Taiwan has planned for Chinese missiles. Again, they've had 70 years to plan for any contingency China would throw at them. Much of their forces are buried in the mountains, or sit on the back sides of the mountains, and can immediately and rapidly be deployed in the need of some sort of fight against China. But let's say half hit the ground and make it en masse on 14 beaches, which you can't unload 1 million people safely onto 14 different beaches in Taiwan to try and conduct an assault up the beach. those beaches would be so heavily defended by everything from tank traps to concertina wire to machine guns to artillery, all pre-sighted, everyone getting off boats. This would be D-Day times 1,000. They would just be wrecked. Everyone coming up that beachhead would just be absolutely wrecked. They would just be literally stacking bodies until people would have to try to climb over them. And the only saving grace for China at that point would be potentially just the sheer numbers of forces and potentially Taiwan running out of ammunition on these areas. But that doesn't mean anything. You've taken the beaches, you still have to take the cities. It just, the impossibility of it is so huge that when China talks about taking Taiwan by 2027, I just chuckle. Sure, they can try to execute blockades, naval blockades, but that's an act of war and Taiwan would respond. And there's just no physical way by force China can take Taiwan. And that's why I say most of their blustery stuff is rhetoric. Most of their anger at Taiwan is rhetoric. A lot of their buildup when it comes to capability is in defending the Spratly Islands. A lot of their buildup in capability is for actually expeditionary, to counter the U.S. expeditionary. They have a big interest in Africa. So China is actually trying to build up a capability in hybrid helicopter carriers and troop transport so they can land troops on beachheads in countries in Africa, not so much for Taiwan. Taiwan for them, and they've even admitted this many times despite the return to the angry rhetoric, because they know everyone's got short memories, but China has consistently said that they want to woo Taiwan with economic measures, with financing, with investment, bring them over as friends, because the reality is even they know they can't take the country at all without just flat out destroying the country entirely, completely. And as we've seen, even that is a problem for the belligerent nation, as Russia has shown. That's not necessarily a course of action that works. So, and again, Taiwan has prepared far longer, is far more advanced, is far stronger with regard to defending themselves than Ukraine was. And it would just be, we'd probably see the single largest amount of deaths in a day or a 48-hour period in the history of warfare on that day. And China knows this. So that's why I just don't think a whole lot's going to happen with regard to all-out war between the two countries. And again, this doesn't include the U.S. or Japan or Australia or any of those other allies they have getting involved. This is just Taiwan themselves.